Okay, folks, buckle up, because tonight we're exploring a theory that suggests we might not have been the first civilization on Earth. Get ready for a wild ride. Imagine this for a moment. Tomorrow morning, every human on Earth vanishes. No warning, no disaster, no aliens, just gone. Cities sit silent. Cars rust in the streets. Power grids fail within days. Within decades, forests reclaim the suburbs. Within centuries, skyscrapers collapse. Within a few thousand years, the great mountains of our civilization crumble into dust. Fast forward 50 million years, the Statue of Liberty? Gone. The Great Wall of China? Gone. Even the pyramids of Egypt would likely be nothing more than scattered stone buried under sediment. In the language of geology, our entire civilization would become a thin layer in the rock record, barely visible. And that leads us to a very unsettling question. If an advanced civilization existed on Earth millions of years ago, would we even know? Now, this is not science fiction. In 2018, NASA climate scientist Gavin Schmidt and astrophysicist Adam Frank published a scientific paper asking exactly that question. It's called the Silurian Hypothesis, and it asks something that sounds like the opening line of a conspiracy theory, but came from serious scientists. What if an advanced civilization existed on Earth long before humans? And what if the planet erased almost all evidence that they were ever here? Okay, now before anyone grabs a shovel and starts digging for ancient reptile laptops in their backyard, let's slow down for a second. The Silurian hypothesis is not claiming ancient civilizations actually existed. It's a thought experiment, a scientific what if. Now basically, the scientist asked a simple question. If an industrial civilization existed millions of years ago, would geology even preserve evidence of it? And the uncomfortable answer is maybe not. So, this episode is not about proving ancient reptile engineers built skyscrapers in the Jurassic. It's about asking how much of Earth's history might simply be missing. And what it turns out is a lot more than you might expect. The missing pages of Earth's history. We like to imagine Earth's history as a neat timeline. Dinosaurs here, ice ages there. Humans arriving at the very end, like the final chapter of a very long book. But the reality is far messier. The geological record is not a complete archive. It's more like a book where most of the pages have been torn out. Earth is constantly rewriting its own surface. Mountains rise and erode. Oceans swallow continents. Glaciers grind entire landscapes into powder. Tectonic plates drag ancient crust deep into the mantle, where it melts and disappears forever. Over tens of millions of years, the planet becomes a very efficient cleaning crew, which means most of the past is simply gone. Even fossils, the things we rely on to reconstruct ancient life, are incredibly rare. For a creature to become a fossil, an almost impossible series of events has to occur. The organism must die in the right environment, be buried quickly, avoid scavengers, survive geological pressure, and then somehow be exposed again millions of years later so that someone can discover it. And the vast majority of life that has ever existed on Earth has left absolutely no fossil record at all. Dinosaurs ruled the planet for more than 150 million years. Yet, we have fossils for only a tiny fraction of the species that lived during that time. Now imagine a civilization, not necessarily millions of years long, just 100,000 years, longer than our current industrial era, but still a blink of an eye on their geological timescale. If that civilization was concentrated in coastal regions or environments that did not favour fossil preservation, it could theoretically vanish almost completely from the rock record. Cities would erode, metals would oxidize, plastics would break down. The planet would recycle everything. In a few million years, there might be almost nothing left, which leads to an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe we are not the first intelligent species to industrialize this planet. Maybe we are simply the first ones whose traces we have noticed. This is the part where geology gets a little humbling. We tend to think of the fossil record like a museum archive where everything important gets catalogued. In reality, it's more like finding 3 puzzle pieces from a 1,000-piece puzzle and trying to guess the picture. Something like 99% of all species that have ever lived vanished without leaving clear fossils. So, when scientists say there is no evidence of earlier civilizations, that's technically true. But it is also true that the geological record is extremely incomplete, which is exactly why the Silurian hypothesis is interesting. It forces scientists to ask what evidence would even survive. The fingerprint of a civilization. So, if the geological record is incomplete, how would we ever find evidence of a lost civilization? You can't expect to discover skyscrapers or buried highways after tens of millions of years. Cities crumble, steel rusts, concrete turns to powder. Even Mount Everest will eventually erode away. So, scientists realize something important. If you want to detect a civilization that vanished deep in time, you should not look for buildings, you should look for fingerprints. Now, not physical ones, but chemical ones. Every industrial civilization changes the planet it lives on. Right now, humanity is leaving a very clear fingerprint in Earth's geology. Scientists even have a name for it, the Anthropocene. Now, for the first time in Earth's history, a single species is altering the atmosphere, oceans, and climate on a global scale. Now, when we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon that has a specific chemical signature, a particular ratio of carbon isotopes called carbon-12 and carbon-13. Now, that signature shows up in ice cores, ocean sediments, and rock layers forming right now. Future geologists millions of years from now would see a very strange moment in the rock record. A sudden spike in carbon, rapid global warming, unusual chemical compounds that do not normally appear in nature. It would look like something flipped a switch. And that is the key insight behind the Silurian Hypothesis. If an industrial civilization existed before humans, we probably would not find their cities, but we might find their atmospheric fingerprints preserved in ancient rock. A brief moment in deep time where the chemistry of the planet suddenly changed. A signal, a disturbance, a thin geological line that whispers someone was here. Alright, and this is where the idea gets really clever. The Silurian Hypothesis basically says if you're looking for ancient industry, don't look for ancient factories, look for chemical weirdness. Think of it like forensic science for planets. If a civilization burns a lot of fuel, you can change the atmosphere. That change gets trapped in rock layers. And those layers can last millions of years. Now, this doesn't mean scientists have found proof of ancient factories or ancient reptile oil rigs, but it does mean we know what the planetary fingerprint of industry looks like. And that means we can start scanning the deep past for something suspicious, which brings us to a very interesting moment in Earth's history. The suspect, the PETM Event. About 56 million years ago, something strange happened to Earth. Geologists call it the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or simply the PETM. In geological terms, it happened incredibly fast. Global temperatures rose by roughly 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. Oceans became warmer and more acidic. Massive amounts of carbon suddenly appeared in the atmosphere, and the whole planet went through a dramatic climate shift that lasted roughly 200,000 years. Now, here is where things get interesting. When scientists analysed the carbon from that time, they found a familiar pattern. The ratio of carbon isotopes shifted in a way that looks eerily similar to what we are doing today by burning fossil fuels. In other words, the chemical fingerprint of the PETM looks surprisingly like the fingerprint of industrial carbon release. And to be clear, most scientists believe the cause was natural. The leading theories involve massive volcanic eruptions, methane releases from the ocean floor, or warming feedback loops. But when Schmidt and Frank examined the data for the Silurian Hypothesis paper, they pointed out something fascinating. From a purely chemical perspective, the geological record does not actually tell you what caused the carbon spike. It only shows that the carbon appeared. Imagine discovering a layer in Earth's history where carbon levels suddenly surge, the climate warms rapidly, and ecosystems shift dramatically. To future scientists studying our era, that layer will represent humanity, which raises an unsettling possibility. What if the PETM layer represents something similar? Not proof, not evidence, but a geological signal that looks strangely familiar, like smoke drifting through deep time. And smoke usually means something was burning. Okay, now before we accidentally start trending on reptilian conspiracy TikTok, let's pump the brakes. Now, the PETM is a real event. Carbon spikes are real. The warming is real. But almost all scientists think it was caused by natural processes like methane release or volcanic activity. Now, the Silurian Hypothesis doesn't claim otherwise, but what it points out is something subtle. If a civilization had caused that spike, the geological signature might look almost identical. So, the PETM is not evidence of ancient industry, but it does show something important. If an industrial civilization existed long enough ago, the evidence might look exactly like something we already think is natural, and that is pretty unsettling thought. The plastic layer, technofossils. Imagine a geologist 50 million years in the future. They drill deep into the rock layers of Earth, reading the planet's history like a barcode of time. And for millions of years, the layers look normal. Sediment, fossils, ancient ocean floors pressed into stone. And then suddenly something strange appears. A thin layer filled with things that should not exist. Fragments of plastic, synthetic chemicals, microscopic spheres of aluminium and concrete dust. These are what scientists now call technofossils. Unlike bones or shells, technofossils are objects created by technology rather than biology. Right now, humanity is producing them at an astonishing scale. Plastic alone has become so widespread that it is accumulating in sediments across the planet. Ocean floors, river deltas, even remote Arctic ice. Over time, some of these materials will fossilize. Future geologists may discover a very unusual layer in Earth's crust, a layer full of strange artificial materials that do not occur naturally. A civilization horizon, a thin chemical scar marking the age of humanity. Now imagine searching the past for something similar. Not plastic necessarily. A previous civilization might have used completely different materials. Maybe advanced ceramics. Maybe exotic alloys. Maybe advanced ceramics. Maybe exotic alloys. Maybe biodegradable technology that vanished without a trace. But it's also possible they produce chemicals that nature rarely creates. Synthetic compounds, industrial molecules. If a mysterious layer of strange chemistry appeared in rock that was 50 million years old, scientists would have to ask a very uncomfortable question. Was this created by geology or by technology? Because the deeper we look into the Earth's past, the more we realize something unsettling. If a civilization came and went long before humans, the evidence might not look like ruins, it might look like chemistry. This idea of technofossils is honestly one of the creepiest parts of the whole hypothesis, because it reminds us that future scientists will not know us through our monuments, they'll know us through our trash, plastic bottles, industrial chemicals, strange synthetic materials that nature never intended. And that's our legacy. Now, to be clear, nobody has discovered an ancient plastic layer from some lost civilization. But scientists do actively search for unusual chemical signatures in old rock. Because if technology ever existed deep in Earth's past, chemistry is probably where the evidence would survive. And this next part takes that idea into a much darker direction. The nuclear signature. There is one technological fingerprint that might survive longer than almost anything else humans have ever created: radiation. Since the 1940s, humanity has detonated more than 2,000 nuclear weapons. Each explosion released rare radioactive isotopes into the atmosphere. Now, some of these isotopes decay quickly, but others can persist for extremely long periods of time. One of the most important is plutonium-244. This isotope has a half-life of roughly 80 million years. That means the radioactive signature from nuclear detonations could remain detectable in the geological record for tens of millions of years. Long after our cities crumble and our monuments erode away, future geologists might discover a very thin radioactive layer in the Earth's crust, a silent marker of a civilization that mastered nuclear physics, which raises an eerie question. If another civilization existed long before humans, would we find similar radioactive fingerprints in ancient rock? Well, there's one place on Earth that sometimes gets mentioned in discussions like this. Deep in Gabon, West Africa, scientists discovered something remarkable in the 1970s. A natural nuclear reactor, 2 billion years old. Uranium deposits in the Oklo region underwent self-sustaining nuclear fission reactions. In other words, nature accidentally built its own nuclear reactor. Geologists have studied Oklo extensively and confirmed it was a natural process. But the discovery sparked curiosity among conspiracy theorists. If a natural reactor can exist, could an artificial one have existed somewhere in Earth's distant past? There's currently no evidence for that, but the idea reveals something fascinating. If an advanced civilization ever used nuclear technology on Earth, its radioactive fingerprints might still be hiding in the rocks, waiting quietly for someone to notice them. Alright, quick reality check before anyone starts accusing ancient reptiles of running nuclear power plants. Now, the Oklo reactor is absolutely natural. It is a well-understood geological phenomenon. No mystery, alien engineers required, but it does demonstrate something really interesting. Nuclear reactions can leave geological evidence that lasts for millions or even billions of years. Which means if an ancient civilization had used nuclear technology on a large scale, we might eventually find those traces. So far, we haven't, but the possibility raises a fascinating question. If something like that did exist long ago, what kind of intelligence could have created it? And that is where this story gets really strange. Who were they? So, let's assume for a moment that a previous technological civilization did exist. Not proven, not even likely according to most scientists, but let's entertain the possibility. If it wasn't humans, who could it have been? The Silurian Hypothesis gets its name from the British science fiction series Doctor Who. In that show, the Silurians were an intelligent reptilian species that ruled Earth long before humans appeared. The name stuck because it captures the imagination. But the real scientific question is more subtle. Could intelligence have evolved on Earth more than once? Evolution has produced intelligence in multiple animal groups already. Dolphins, elephants, octopuses. Certain birds like crows and parrots show remarkable problem-solving abilities. Even some dinosaurs may have been trending in that direction. One species in particular often gets mentioned in speculative discussions, Troodon, a small theropod dinosaur that lived about 70 million years ago. It had a relatively large brain capacity compared to other dinosaurs, forward-facing eyes and grasping hands. In the 1980s, a paleontologist named Dale Russell proposed a thought experiment. If Troodon had survived the mass extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, could it have continued evolving toward higher intelligence? Over millions of years, would a dinosaur lineage have developed tool usage, technology, culture? Most scientists consider that scenario unlikely. Evolution does not follow a predetermined path, but the experiment reveals something fascinating. Human-level intelligence may not be a one-time event in Earth's history. Given enough time, complex brains might evolve more than once. And Earth has had plenty of time. Life has existed here for more than 3.5 billion years. Humans have been around for about 300,000. On that scale, we arrive seconds before midnight, which raises a haunting thought. What if someone else arrived earlier, and we simply missed their chapter? Well, this is where things start drifting from science into speculation territory. There's currently zero evidence that intelligent dinosaurs built cities or invented Wi-Fi passwords millions of years ago. But what scientists do agree on is that intelligence can evolve in different branches of life. Birds, mammals, cephalopods all develop sophisticated brains independently. So, the question becomes less crazy than it sounds. Not did dinosaurs build civilization, but could intelligence evolve more than once? Earth has had billions of years to experiment, and evolution is basically nature running the world's longest science experiment. So, statistically speaking, we might not be the only successful run. The Great Silence. When astronomers look into the night sky, they ask a famous question. If intelligent life should be common in the universe, where is everybody? This puzzle is known as the Fermi paradox, but there is a quieter version of that same question much closer to home. What if the silence is not out there? What if it is here? Imagine civilizations rising and falling across deep time. A species discovers tools, masters fire, learns to harness energy, build cities. For a few thousand years, they reshape the planet. Then something happens. Climate shifts, resources run out, technology collapses, or the civilization simply fades away. Given millions of years, the planet erases almost everything. Rivers move, mountains crumble, continents drift. Eventually, the evidence disappears beneath layers of sediment. Then life continues. Evolution keeps experimenting. Eventually, a new intelligent species appears. They study the rocks, they examine fossils, they search for the origins, and they assume they are the first, not because they're unique, but because the previous chapters have already been erased. The Silurian Hypothesis doesn't claim this has happened, but it asks us to confront something unsettling. The Earth is very old, and the geological record is very incomplete, which means the history of intelligence on this planet might be much shorter than the history of life itself, or it might not be. And that uncertainty leaves us staring at a strange possibility. We might not be the first tenants of Earth. We might just be the latest. This is the moment where the Silurian hypothesis really messes with your brain a little, because it flips the usual alien question upside down. Instead of asking, are we alone in the universe? It asks, are we alone in Earth's history? Again, there's no evidence for ancient lost civilizations hiding in the fossil record. But the hypothesis forces scientists to ask what evidence would even survive. And that question is valuable on its own. Because understanding how civilizations leave traces in geology might one day help us detect life on other planets too. Which is pretty cool. Also slightly terrifying. The dust of tomorrow. Let's step back for a moment. For most of human history, we believed our story was the center of everything. The first cities, the first tools, the first species to reshape the planet with technology. But geology tells a very different story. The Earth is not young. It is not even moderately old. It is ancient beyond comfortable comprehension. 4.5 billion years of continents drifting, oceans forming, mountains rising and eroding back into dust. In that span of time, entire ecosystems have appeared and vanished without leaving more than a thin shadow in the rocks. The Silurian hypothesis doesn't claim that an ancient technological civilization definitely existed. What it says is something much more unsettling. If one had existed tens of millions of years ago, the evidence might be extremely difficult to find today. Cities would erode, metals would oxidize, plastics would ferment and disperse. Even nuclear waste would slowly decay and become harder to detect. After enough time, almost everything disappears. All that might remain are subtle fingerprints, a strange chemical spike in the rock record, a sudden shift in carbon isotopes, a thin geological layer that hints something unusual happened long ago. And we've found one such event. 56 million years ago, during the PETM, Earth experienced a dramatic surge in carbon and temperature. Scientists believe it was caused by natural processes such as volcanic activity or methane releases. But the Silurian hypothesis asks a strange question. If an industrial civilization had existed before us, would its fingerprint look very different from the ones we are leaving behind today? Right now, humanity is writing its own geological layer. Future scientists millions of years from now might see our era as a thin band of carbon, plastics, radioactive isotopes, and strange synthetic compounds buried in the rock. They may never know who we were. They may never see our cities. They may never find our bones. They will only ever see the trace we left behind. And they might wonder what caused it. Maybe they will conclude it was natural. Maybe they will speculate about a lost civilization. Or maybe they will simply turn the page and move on. Because in the eyes of geology, civilizations are brief. We like to think we are the masters of this planet, but from the perspective of deep time, we're just a thin layer of carbon waiting to be buried. The real question is not whether someone came before us. The real question is this: when our chapter ends, will anyone ever know we were here? Or will the next intelligent species stand on this planet millions of years from now, look at the rocks beneath their feet, and ask the same haunting question: were we the first or just the latest? So this is the part where we all stare quietly into the distance for a moment and rethink our place in the universe. To be clear, the Silurian hypothesis is not claiming ancient reptile civilizations were driving around in stone sports cars 50 million years ago. It's a scientific thought experiment, a way to ask how detectable industrial civilizations really are in deep time. And that question is actually useful. It helps scientists figure out how we might detect advanced life on other planets. But it also leaves us with a weird thought. If we vanish tomorrow, the Earth would eventually forget us, which is humbling and slightly creepy. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Now, I've started a second channel, Chronicles of the Drift. Similar content to this channel, but much more focused on storytelling. It's brand new and has only got one episode so far, the Tunguska Event, but I could really do with your help getting 1,000 subs and 4,000 watch hours as soon as possible so it can be monetized, and any help is greatly appreciated. Now, it might not be your cup of tea, but it's probably my last attempt to save the Mysteria archive. After this, I'm out of ideas. Now, I put the link in the description below. Now, as always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Okay, my friends, be safe, and until next time, stay curious.